Hello everyone, this is Lala, and today I'm going to do another Big Brother series. But this time it's going to be about the archetypes slash stereotypes that is in the casting of Big Brother. I made a few videos in this regard I'll just say several years ago that I have since deleted because one, it was of poor quality, at least when it came to some of the visuals, and I kind of do videos differently now. And two, there's been a lot of people since then, and I wanted to be more thorough. So this video is just going to be a general description of the amount of archetypes and stereotypes that are on the show when it comes to their casting choices and what they are. I am going to delve more into each archetype or stereotype individually in separate videos and go through the people who fit through that category within Big Brother history. So that's how I'm going to handle this for the next several videos when it comes to this Big Brother archetype slash stereotype series. So let's just get right to it. I had to do some research based on what these archetypes slash stereotypes were. So I went on a few Reddit posts to look up what were the common themes and trends and what I based my prior videos that I've since deleted on, and I kind of grouped them all together if there are many different ways of stating the same archetype. I kind of created another name for them, and I got 15 of these archetypes slash stereotypes, and we're going to get into that now. So the first archetype slash stereotype that I do have here is the nerd slash genius, and this is the male archetype that I am focusing on since there is going to be a female equivalent. So obviously this one's pretty self-explanatory. When I'm referring to a nerd or genius, I'm referring to a male who is cast because they are very smart academically, they have a lot of success in their education, they have very high earning careers, and they are cast to be the dorky nerd and the dorky genius. So this hasn't been very prevalent in the earlier eras, especially in the first era, but it became more and more prominent as the eras came on, and it became a lot more prominent from the modern era onwards. The male superfans tend to fit this archetype because they tend to cast a lot of people who aren't superfans, and because you're a superfan, you're seen as someone who's strategically able or capable or knowledgeable of the show where you can use that to your advantage. So that is what the nerd slash genius male fits under. And most of them thus far have been white, but that could be for a variety of reasons. They are usually younger men, they're usually inexperienced, and because they're younger and they're seen as more inexperienced, they are kind of pedestalized and almost babied in a way as well. Now we're going to go into the female counterpart, and I dub this the quirky slash nerdy slash adorable superfan. So there really weren't anyone that fit this category in the OG era, just from what I've seen. And the first person who does fit this is Danielle from Big Brother 8. And there wasn't many in that post-classic era after. This era mainly blew up with the modern and the diversity era, so essentially from 16 and onwards. So obviously they are female superfans, that's the main category, the main reason why they're put in here, but that isn't the only or the main qualifier for this category. They put a lot of emphasis on the person being, or the woman being very quirky and adorable, or in the elements to fit this stereotype slash casting archetype. They are more often than not younger, kind of like their male counterparts. So the huge part with them is that they are young, they're seen as quirky, adorable, they are seen as inexperienced, they're seen as socially awkward, but they are very knowledgeable about the game specifically, and they're knowledgeable about book smarts as well. So it's essentially pretty much the same thing, but there's a sweetness and a naiveness and an awkwardness that's kind of endearing for the women that isn't really seen as the same for the men. I think the main difference is that the quirkiness and the adorableness is heavily focused on with the women. That isn't really the case with the men. Alrighty, and the next category that I have on the list is a fitness jock or the fitness jock, and this can apply to man and woman. Though I do think there's a difference when it comes to the genders of the specific archetypes, the stereotype that I will somewhat get through. So, with the men that I have on the list that you don't really just see from this picture, a lot of them are not the smartest or they weren't portrayed as the smartest, and there is a lot of interloping between this category and some other male categories that I will get into. But the hardcore male fitness jocks tend to be not the smartest. There's a lot of emphasis in their intros and just their journey on the show on their physical prowess and their athleticism. This could apply to dumb jocks. It would mainly apply to them, but there are also people in this category that I wouldn't necessarily call dumb jocks, if that makes sense. So that's why I'm kind of distinguishing them. But yeah, they're not the smartest people. Their physicality is mainly focused on. But the crossover with some of the other categories is that Big Brother, or CBS in general, casts a lot of fit, young, and quote unquote conventionally attractive people because they're trying to attract the young audience. So just because someone is fit or young doesn't necessarily mean that they're supposed fitness jocks, or at least when it comes to the stereotypical category, when it comes to this casting trope. So now it is time to get into their female counterpart. And some people don't think that there is a female counterpart, but there most definitely is a female counterpart for this. I think the distinguish between the two and why some people don't think there's a female part is because, like I kind of mentioned earlier, there's a heavy emphasis on the dumb jock, which is usually put towards the males. But when it comes to the women, that's not really the case. When it comes to the women, their intelligence or lack thereof in this category really isn't emphasized. But what is emphasized is their physical prowess and their athleticism overall. We see this in their intros, what they've put on their biographies, and just their experiences on the show. A lot of these women tend to win a lot of competitions, or they're kept around or targeted earlier because of their physical prowess and their threatening nature due to them being so physically fit. And just from looking at it here, there's all different types of women that fit this, but they are mainly cast because they are athletic women and they have different experiences as a result of that. Okay, so now we're talking about the Southern Belle slash Redneck category or archetype, and this applies to men and women. So essentially, most of these people, if not all of them, are essentially just people who live in the South or came from the South when they were cast on their Big Brother seasons. There's always just a different flair to the Southern Big Brother house guests. Obviously, they have very antiquated accents that makes them stand out from the others. A lot of them tend to be rural people, too, so that kind of adds an interesting flair to them. There is a difference between the women and the men, where a lot of the Southern women kind of fit into the Southern Belle archetype, where they're seen as the sweet, innocent, friendly, kind of spicy at the same time. But some of them could also be seen as a bit trashy, unbecoming, or once you see more of them, you start to see the layers of them that aren't the most pleasant, but they definitely add a twang to everything. And when it comes to the men, I guess, I don't know, would it be the Southern Bow? You can maybe assume that that is an element to them, but a lot of them tend to fit the redneck category, in my opinion. And essentially, these are people who are seen as rural, kind of unbecoming, somewhat trashy, very ignorant. But some of them are also very, very, very sweet and kind as well, so you can't just generalize them. You definitely see elements of this archetype depending on the gender in the first era, but it became more and more prominent through the second era, then it grew in the third and the fourth era, and essentially is a staple in Big Brother casting at this point. So there's definitely the Southern Belle slash Redneck archetype, and this is one of the few regional ones that I do have here. So the next category is the punk slash alternative goth slash the rocker archetype, and this can be a man or a woman. Honestly, this is very self-explanatory. They wanted to cast, sorry, the people who are in this category are cast because they're expected to be loud, bold personalities who want to really fit in with as many people because it's not like there's going to be a bunch of rockers in the season. But just from looking at the list I have here, not many people really fit into this category. A lot of them do end up being outcasts just due to them having a different appearance and demeanor. And while they're probably cast with the expectation of them being loud, some of them are definitely a lot more muted and quiet. Though the more notable ones definitely live up to their reputation and what production wanted from them in this regard. So the next archetype is the Manic Pixie Dream slash Spiritual Girl. And obviously this is a woman archetype slash stereotype, so it only applies to them. So there's a decent amount of women that fit into this category from all four eras. And to me, these are the women who's very bubbly, who's very quirky, and they have a lot of interests that may seem odd to the average person in the Big Brother house, or at least compared to the types of people that they like to cast en masse in the Big Brother house, where some of them are very spiritual, some of them aren't the smartest, some of them really have no idea what they're doing in the game, so that part of them really causes them to be not taken seriously, and sometimes they're just oddness is really annoying to people. So they cause a lot of conflict unintentionally in that way too. So some of these women could be on the nerdier side, but some of them could be seen as a quote unquote babe. It's mainly about their personality, them kind of being unself aware about certain things, and them just kind of being quirky and odd, especially compared to some of the other women. So yeah. It's where that they are taken seriously in the game as a player, and they tend to get the dodo edit a lot of the time, which the editors definitely more than takes advantage of and enjoys giving them the dodo edits for sure. But they can be fun to watch on the feeds and on the episodes, depending on how they bounce off their casts and other people. So the next category that I have here is the parent slash older house guest archetype or stereotype. And obviously, these two are different things since you can be very young and be a parent, and you can also be very old and not be a parent. But based on how Big Brother specifically casts these two groups, they kind of like to cast them as a 2-for-1. So the older person on a season is most likely going to be a parent, and a parent is most likely going to be an older person on the specific cast. And because of the cast skewing young, like early to mid 20s, the quote unquote parent could literally, or the quote unquote older person could literally be in the mid 30s in comparison. So that's kind of the dichotomy there. Due to them being parents where most of the casts aren't parents and them being deemed as older compared to the much younger cast, they tend to be outcasts in this regard, and there's really not many of them that will cause them to blend in easier. If they are younger, or if they are on an autocast in comparison, they generally do blend in a bit better. Or I notice people who don't make them being parents their biggest identity tends to blend in more as well. So obviously, like I mentioned, these two are different things in reality, but Big Brother likes to cast them both together. Due to them being parents, they either appear as unthreatening because, oh, they're just an older person, or they use their age to kind of diminish the older house guests, where they are seen as the mother or the father of the house, so they can't be strategic, they can't be deceitful, they can't be outplaying me. Oh my gosh. A mother's not supposed to trick you, a father's not supposed to make a fool out of you. All of that kind of comes into play with this archetype, especially when it comes to the strategic gameplay and how it's perceived. So the next category that I have when it comes to Big Brother archetypes and stereotypes is the aggressive slash alpha male or female. So obviously by that term, this applies to men and women. And I do think that this is one of the more prominent archetypes when it comes to Big Brother casting. So, whether they are a man or a woman, they are cast because of their very strong and bold personalities, their need to absolutely be a leader, and they are strong go getters. They cannot lay under the radar if their lives depended on it. They are not followers whatsoever, even though it would benefit them to be a follower. And because they are such leaders and they can't sit back, they're always out in the forefront, and it causes them to have a lot of targets on them. This also causes them to control a lot of the strategic elements of the game, and they are very prominent in a lot of the social dynamics of the game due to them being natural leaders and being go-getters. They make things happen for them. But the issue is this causes a lot of people to notice their gameplay, so it kind of puts them in a corner after a while. Because of their big, bold personalities, they are also very I don't know if them being conflict attracts them a lot. So these people will tend to find their way into a lot of fights, a lot of arguments, whether it's gameplay or personal. And because of their need to be so involved in the gameplay and their personalities just being very volatile, they tend to get a lot of screen time and airtime as well. And they tend to fight with a lot of alpha personalities as well, whether they're allies or foes. So as you see here, there's a lot of people who could fit this category based on gender, and it's not based on demographics either. You could be a white person, you could be a non-white person, you could be a younger person, you could be an older person, and fit this category. And some people weren't cast to be alpha males or alpha females, but based on their gameplay during their season, they ended up filling that role for their respective seasons. But this is obviously one of the strongest archetypes slash stereotypes when it comes to Big Brother casting, for sure. So the next group that I have here is the LGBT person. And the fact that this is a trope definitely is weird because a gay person, a lesbian person, a bisexual person, and a transgender person aren't the same, but looking at how casting handles things, it's clear that they do cast the LGBT person as their own trope. I've already gone through essentially most, if not all of them, in a separate series of videos, so I'm not going to discuss them here. And there is a lot more emphasis on gay men, specifically that have been cast within the LGBT group, though I've discussed that in depth prior as well. So we're just going to move right on along. I also have to add in here that people who have since their seasons come out as being a part of the LGBT community but weren't out about it on their Big Brother journeys will not fit in this journey because the casting producers and the network cast them as a straight person, not an LGBT person. So that's just something I have to add in here when I eventually get into these separate videos. So the next casting archetype slash stereotype that I do have is the New York slash New Jersey native, or I should just say the Northeastern native. I made a video about Italians in Big Brother because I thought this was an Italian stereotype, but it might just be due to a lot of the people that they cast on the show that are from the East tend to be Italian, but I don't think it's specifically about them being Italian. So it's clear that with this archetype, they cast people from the East so they can be tougher, they can be somewhat aggressive, they can have funny one-liners, they can be very aggressive, they can be go-getters, and there's definitely a different sense of flair with them compared to literally anyone else on the cast, and I do feel like it's intentional on casting's part, kind of like how they intentionally cast someone from the South to either represent the Redneck or the Southern Belle. I feel like the East or the Northeast, this is their counterpart of doing that. But yeah, that's really all I have to say about them. They're generally very sassy, they might be very aggressive, and they talk about where they come from a lot and their heritage a lot. So yeah. So now we are moving on to a big one, which is what I consider to be the model slash heartthrob slash stud slash pageant casting archetype, which obviously applies for men and women. Obviously, for the men, it's mainly the Heartthrob and Stud, though there are some that are models too, so I guess that fits them too. And for the women, it is the model slash babe slash pageant category that fits them. So essentially, these are people who are cast, and there's a lot of emphasis on their good looks and sex appeal. Since obviously the show is trying to attract younger audiences, like teen and young adult, and teens and young adults like looking at attractive young adults. So that is the goal. When it comes to the dynamics in the house, their good looks, seemingly unthreatening nature, and good social gain, and their attractiveness will cause them to bond with a lot of people and to carry them far. They are cast to be the golden people to make it far into the seasons and to be huge threats to win. Many of the people on this list definitely fall into one or two more archetypes, so they are the perfect example of a heartthrob. And there is a lot of connections to them being athletic. The difference is there's a lot of emphasis on how good looking they are, whether it's by the editors or the other house guests or even themselves. You usually see a lot of footage of them either shirtless or wearing their swimsuits and underwear. For the women, there are a lot who are models and pageant women, and due to that, they can be perceived as being very fake and inauthentic. But some use that towards their advantage as well. You'll notice the people on each cast who are primarily cast to be eye candy. But despite them being set up to be the golden people, people could be envious of them due to their good looks and them being seen as a Disney prince or a Disney princess or to be put in that position, or they don't have the versatility to do more. But the ones that are good players and fit into this archetype are a lot more cutthroat than people realize, and they end up being underestimated. There is another factor that I have to add with this archetype. They have the highest chance of being cast with the sole purpose of them being put in a showmance with someone of a similar archetype, since showmances apparently drive viewership. So, yeah, that's definitely a huge part in their stories, usually. That and or their ability to flirt with other house guests. So, the next casting archetype is the religious god worshippers, which obviously could be male or female. This one's pretty self explanatory. These are people who are very religious, and we get a lot of content about them being religious on the show, whether it's through them talking about it in their diary rooms or in their personal segments where they're just interacting with the house. They show them dealing with their religion a lot. They could be any race, but if we just look at the pattern regarding the people who fit this archetype, they more often than not are black. If not that, they are white. That's just the general trend. And the religion that tends to be focused on in this archetype is Christianity. You'll definitely be able to tell who fits this archetype, though it seems like they haven't done it much in recent years, especially in this most recent era. So the next archetype that I have when it comes to Big Brother casting is the gimmick slash plant slash camera whore. How I define this category is people who will definitely act up for the cameras to push whatever agenda production wants. They are the ones who tend to give the most obnoxious diary rooms possible. They tend to say anything that production wants them to say to make a better product, and they're just people who aren't really seen as genuine, and they are very obsessed with their image. They're obsessed with putting on a good show, and there's something about them that's just very, very, very performative. And it's usually because they are seen as smart and or very charismatic, but a lot of people definitely feel something is off about them due to this. But yeah, they're definitely generally always just production favorites. In recent years, I do think these are the social media personalities who come into the show and try to replicate what they do on TikTok onto the show, and production tends to like that because they like people who are easy to script. Can be a man or a woman, but I would say like 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 times it's going to be a man. It just is what it is, just based on what they've done historically on Big Brother. Second last category that I have here when it comes to Big Brother casting archetypes or stereotypes is the outcast. And the simplest way to describe this is when you look at the cast and you see someone that just sticks out like a sore thumb and they're a huge outlier compared to everyone else. The main reason why this is usually involves generation gaps, mainly age. So you'll usually have an older person who can't fit in with the rest of the cast because they're much older and the cast is much younger. Race might come into play with this as well, where someone might be the only black person in an overwhelmingly white cast, or something along the lines of that. And another way this might come into play is if, let's just say, the cast is full of people from the East Coast, and you're the only West Coast, or you're the only Southern person on the cast, or vice versa. Or if you're the only overtly conservative person in overtly liberal cast, or vice versa, you could be an outcast due to that. But it's clear that they're intentionally cast because they weren't going to gel very well with the house guests. And the final casting archetype slash stereotype that they tend to do is the racial minority. So I've already delved into this twice, technically. One about 3 years ago when Big Brother 24 was airing, where I went through all of those groups. And then I did it again a few months ago. So check those out if you want my deep thoughts into that. The casting and CBS tends to have one drop one mentality when it comes to this, where if you're mixed with Asian, they'll cast you for that Asian spot. If you're mixed with black, they'll cast you for that black spot. And then they treat certain groups like Latinos as races and Arabs as races when they're not racist. They don't really distinguish between a racial minority and an ethnic minority. But because Big Brother is about bringing people from all walks of life, that's also going to include a racial slash ethnic difference where you'll see people from different ethnic and racial groups interact with one another. So, throughout the series, when I break down the videos of each of the casting archetypes, I'm not going to do this one because I've already done it twice. So, that's really it. Obviously, there are some clashes due to some differences in how people of different races and ethnic groups interact. Sometimes there's a lot of teachable moments in this regard, but other times there's a lot of unfortunate racism that does take place. In conclusion, this is my list for all of the common Big Brother archetypes slash stereotypes when it comes to their casting. Some of them definitely are more commonplace, I believe, and others are definitely more unconventional based on the other stereotypes and archetypes that I usually see people mention when it comes to the show. So I'm going to go through all but the racial minority categories and the LGBT ones. I believe I already did that too. So all but two of the categories in separate videos where I'll go more in depth with those archetypes slash stereotypes, and I don't know if I'm going to cover everyone who fits into each category or just a majority of them, but I am going to delve into them much more into detail, and then and kind of continue the archetypes in a book. Sorry. This is essentially like a book where this video is like the introduction and then the 8, 9 to 10 to however many archetypes that there are the chapters that I will go more in depth of. So I'm definitely looking forward to doing this. I'm getting more into doing Big Brother content again, where I've been more sparse about over the last few months. So things are going back to normal. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. Bye.